starring in will premiere on Monday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time at unicornhunters.com. Please come watch. You'll have plenty of time to watch it anytime you want. It's digital and streaming. It'll be on Vimeo, Facebook, YouTube, hopefully Amazon Prime as well, but unicornhunters.com. Come join us. Lance Bass, Steve Wozniak, Rosie Rios. An incredible, incredible experience. Another dream come true for me. And I would love for you to join us. That was my moment of truth this week. I was going to do it. Well, you know what? I can't because my guest will expect me to do this. I will do the shortest moment of truth ever. I decided, since I am broadcasting today from West Hollywood, California, where I will also announce that I will be living for the next 3 months. I will be here all summer in West Hollywood, and I'm looking forward to that. But I cannot help not make my moment of truth this week about Caitlyn Jenner. Because what I decided since I arrived here and I saw her announced for governor is that it reminded me of something, that the worst kind of human being is one who hates others or hates oneself. And Caitlyn Jenner is a self-loathing human being. And there is nothing probably more despicable. Her stance on LGBTQ issues and matters of equality, especially in our LGBTQ community, make her despicable to me. And I hope every Californian realizes she is, not to mention she's not qualified, by the way. That's another part of the moment of truth. I am more qualified to be governor of California, and so is my guest. So you know what? Let's get right into that. I am so excited today. Every week, I have the privilege, and it is a privilege, of getting to have people that I truly love and admire and respect. And this week, I have one of my closest and dearest friends of over 22 years, I might add. Those are real friends, as you all know. And here at In the Know with Mo, I humanize, as you know, everything I can, because I think at the end of the day, that's all that matters. So Philip Dufour is my guest. And let me just quickly go through the best I can. Philip right now is the president and the creative director of the Dufour Collaborative. He is one of the world's premier, I love this, experience design firms, which is a very fancy schmancy way of saying event management. But I want to go back a little bit because Philip and I met in 1995 when Philip was the first gay social secretary of any president or vice president in the history of the United States, when he was the social secretary to Vice President Al and Second Lady Tipper Gore. And that is when we met. But before that, he was in the Office of Protocol at the State Department. Before that, we're going to get into all of this, as you guys know. We're going to talk about what it's like to be raised in Louisiana. Very similar upbringing to mine, a large Catholic family. We're going to get into all that. Graduate of LSU, and then went on to work at the Elizabeth Glazier Pediatric AIDS Foundation as their director of events, first director of events at the Human Rights Campaign, and we could just go on and on. But let's get started because I want to talk to Philip. I just love you, Philip. You know that.
I know. I love you too, brother.
I mean, you are just one of my dearest friends.
Brothers
In the spirit of full disclosure, we talk almost every day. So this is going to be kind of a very fun interview, very personal, because I have to be careful. I know a little too much about you.
Yeah.
There's but we're gonna talk about your days as a social secretary. We're gonna talk today. Obviously, the last segment in a little while will be about, because of your expertise and your genius, I want us to talk about right at the end, the last segment, on how do you throw an event today that's still successful, still productive, still creative, still fulfilling, right, in this pandemic era and then the upcoming post-pandemic era. But we're going to go back to Louisiana first. Oh my God. Okay, tell us first of all, I call you the pride of Cajun country, right? So let's go back to Cajun country. what was the name of the little town? And walk us through what was those formative years like for you?
So, well, it's first of all, it's really, really fun to be on. I'm so excited to be on your show, and I adore you, and we could cook up a lot of trouble together. So, I'm excited about this, and I'm really proud of you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, sweetie.
I grew up in a little town in the dead center of Louisiana called Alexandria, and it's actually not technically Cajun country. Alexandria is kind of a dividing line between a lot of differences in the state, between North and South, between Cajun and what some people refer to as not Cajun, or other names, Catholic, non-Catholic, hill country, non-hill country. There are hills in North Louisiana. They're more like Mississippi and Arkansas or East Texas, whereas the South is very different, much more French. And I'm a real product of, ironically, of that too. I was born in Port Arthur, Texas, so we do have that in common.
That's right, we do, yeah.
And my mom was from Shreveport, Louisiana, which is northeast Louisiana, or northwest, sorry. And my dad was born in a little small town called Opelousas, which is the same town where Tony Chachery was born. At seasoning. My dad was a fluent French speaker. He and his family, when they got together, they would break into French so that we didn't know what they were saying. So Alexandria was a great town. We lived 3 blocks from church, 4 blocks from Catholic school where I, walked every day for 8 years, 2 blocks from the aquatic club where we all swam or played tennis or did some of that. It was the days when, we got up in the morning, left the house, didn't come back until my dad came out at dinner time to whistle for us to come home for supper.
What a great description.
Yeah.
That is exactly and by the way, we're 2 weeks apart in age, you and I.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think one of the things that's always been a bond between you and I is those life experiences, because they're so similar.
Absolutely.
Yet 2 different cultures, 2 different environments, but the values, right? And kind of the experiences, like you just described so perfectly. We would just leave, right? And then you'd go to school, the after school activities, then you go play, and you didn't come home till they said it was dinner time.
Get on your bike. And we knew it was dinner time, or as we called it, supper. My dad would come out and did that whistle with his fingers, and we knew as Dufour kids in the neighborhood, oh, we got to go home. That's Daddy. Time for dinner, right?
How many Dufour kids were there?
So I'm the youngest of 5. There were 5 of us within 6 years. Good Catholics, right? So I'm the youngest. We were all at St. Francis Cabrini Grammar School at the same time, and I went for free because every kid past the first got a discount, and beyond 4 you went for free, right? So that's how the parish and the nuns kept school filled. Cool.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
So let's, I've had the privilege of knowing so much about your incredible life. And I take a lot of pride here at In the Know with Mo about, talking about all the things that have been successful and happy moments, but we've also all experienced our fair share of setbacks and trauma. But of the 5 Dufour children, one of the things I've always found so perplexing is we have 1 minute, so we're going to do this one and then we're going to break, because Mark, my producer, and I have this love-hate relationship about going to break. But if we don't finish it, we'll pick this up right after. But were 3 of the 5 of you gay?
Yes, 3 out of the 5.
Which is just, to me, it's always been so mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And when we come back, I want to pick up on that, Philip, because the whole Catholic family, the Catholic Church. Again, this is something you and I have commiserated about, and we've spoken about for many years in our personal friendship. But I think it's important to talk about these things so that people can understand about healing, right? And love. And we're a break. We'll be right back. You obviously do not want to miss the next segment. Stay with us.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
I want to get back to football games with my boys.
I want to get back to feeling and touching, connecting with the people around me.
I want to get back to family dinners and my grandma's mac and cheese. I want to get back to real grocery shopping. Taking my time, walking down every aisle, smelling the tomatoes and melons, having a free sample or two, or three.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. But now, there are vaccines. And they are the first step that let us get back to feeling optimistic about the days ahead of us. It's okay to have questions.
Is it safe?
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Now, get the facts. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey sis, missed you this morning. Kim told me you weren't feeling well, so I'm just doing a self-care check.
Ah, thank you, friend.
How you doing?
Girl, listen, my energy was so low because I didn't eat breakfast when I got up, so I had to miss virtual yoga with y'all.
Trust me, I understand.
But I'm doing much better now that I've eaten, so I'm back on track.
Great. In that case, let's get some steps in tonight. I'll come over and we can walk around the lake.
Sounds good. Appreciate you being in my business, too. Now, let me get in yours. Did you check your blood pressure today?
I did that and my squats, okay?
Okay.
High blood pressure is not going to be my friend if I can help it. See you at 6?
Let's get it. See you then.
Now more than ever, it's important that we protect our hearts and the hearts of those we love. Check in on one another and be a part of a healthy blood pressure movement. Rally your squad to take the online pledge at releasethepressure.org. Brought to you by the Release the Pressure Coalition and the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 7034, establishing the Works Progress Administration. The WPA employed millions in public works projects during the Great Depression. As many as 8.5 million Americans worked for the WPA at some point between the years 1935 and 1943. At its height, over 3 million Americans were working WPA jobs. These jobs included the construction of roads, bridges, utilities, and parks. It also meant the construction of new schools, libraries, public buildings, and housing. Many WPA jobs also employed musicians, artists, and writers in literature and art projects. The program's goals were to provide one job to every household suffering long-term unemployment. Some of the most famous projects included LaGuardia Airport in New York City, Blue Ridge Parkway, and the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Artists like Jacob Lawrence and Mark Rothko were employed at the Federal Arts Project. Historian Eric Loomis notes that the Federal Writers Project began the field of oral histories with extensive interviews of surviving ex-slaves. The WPA also bolstered federal funding for school lunches. The program was initially criticized for underemployment of African Americans who suffered disproportionately during the Depression. But many black leaders later hailed the WPA as providing job opportunities to blacks and keeping race discrimination to a minimum, at least in the North. The right attacked the program as a hotbed for communists and a scheme to build Democratic Party patronage. By 1940, WPA projects shifted towards war preparation and defense-related projects. When the country reached full employment in 1942, the WPA ceased to exist by July of 1943.
Welcome back to In the Know with Mo. It's so good to have all of you with me this week. I'm broadcasting from West Hollywood, California, and I send out just as much love as when I'm on the East Coast. But more love I have today for my guest, Philip Dufour, President and Creative Director of the Dufour Collaborative, one of the world's premier experience design firms / event management companies. So we were talking about growing up in Louisiana and Alexandria, 5 kids, Catholic, so similar and parallel to my life. And let's go ahead and reveal the secret here. We're writing a book together, right? This coming year.
We are.
And I have some surprises that I can't announce, Philip, that I arranged last night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you figured that one out.
Yeah.
We're going to do a wonderful book about growing up gay in the South, which is extremely relevant to where we're at in this conversation today. So let's talk about that. I first of all, when did you know, right, as that little boy in Alexandria, Louisiana?
I didn't come out until I was 26, right? I moved to Washington, and I knew for some reason I needed to get out of Louisiana, and then everything once I really accepted being gay, then everything made sense for so many years back.
Yeah.
And I remember as a little kid, looking through the Sears catalog and being more intrigued by the male models than the female models, right? Like, we all had those. Remember the Sears and the Montgomery Ward catalogs? And, that would come to your house. Those big thick catalogs. And so the male models for me I was more interested in that, and it wasn't about the clothes either. But I didn't know that at the time. I was like, probably fifth or sixth grade. But inherently, but you just don't, right? And growing up in a really Catholic family and a really Catholic environment, you didn't know it. But ironically, my three closest best friends growing up, 2 guys and a girl, we all ended up being turned, we were all gay, right? But then we didn't know it. One of my good friends who's now deceased, he knew. But yeah, so it's just funny how we found our own tribe, right? Not really knowing what bonded us together at the time, but obviously now we know what bonded us together.
And speaking of that Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck catalog era, right? Again, anybody listening or watching, the folks that are from our generation are going to go, oh my God, I remember when that big thick thing would arrive, right? And that was like our entertainment. We would flip through it. I really love that you brought that up. But that era, you and I have another similar personal experience in that you lost a brother, right? To AIDS, correct?
I did. Yep.
And I lost my 3 best friends, but of course it was meningitis, pneumonia, and encephalitis, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, let's talk about that. That had to be, first of all, how old were you when you lost your brother?
So my brother Dick was 32, which meant I would have been 28, probably.
And you had just been out for 2 years.
Correct. But ironically, I was working at the Human Rights Campaign Fund, which my parents didn't know what that meant, right? That was part of the reason why the Human Rights Campaign Fund chose that name, right? So that it was not closeted, but it wasn't gay and lesbian.
It wasn't like flamboyant, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, those were those days. So so I was, my brother, he was living in Dallas, and this was the time when there was a lot of misinformation or disinformation about what was going on. He couldn't see certain people, those kinds of things. My parents, it was a really bad time in our family. And one of the real saviors in a lot of this time was one of my best friends who I mentioned growing up, who lived in Dallas, who had one of the most successful hair salons in Dallas, who looked in at my brother quite a bit. And he actually died a couple years, about 8 years later of AIDS. So, in those days, you remember, there were circles and circles of people that you knew dying or who died that might have been your best friend, a brother, or people that you knew 3 people removed or 4 people removed. It was a war. It was like a war.
And that was early in the AIDS.
My brother, 89, was very early. He didn't know he came to see me. He and his partner at the time came to DC. He had Kaposi sarcoma, which, was the bruising that I didn't know. But he also had pneumonia, which his doctor in Dallas told him was just go
get over it.
So I had to see my doctor here, and that's when he knew he was sick. And the small story back pace was he and I ended up on the Donahue show, which I'm not sure you and I have ever talked about.
We haven't.
And so
I knew things were going to happen here.
And we went on because they were looking to do a show on whether or not being gay was hereditary or environmental, that whole argument. And they wanted a pair of siblings. And so my brother had been diagnosed at the time and he was sick, but they did a lot of makeup on him and he didn't know. We didn't talk about that on the show. But those are the days when even saying the word lesbian was not kind of kosher. So Yeah, no, he and I flew to New York, and we were on the Donahue show together, and we didn't tell my parents.
Really?
Yeah, no, and it was carried in those days. You know, a lot of those syndicated shows are picked up by different networks, right?
Well, of course, it was probably in Alexandria.
So it was, and it was on 2 times in Alexandria, because I think ABC and CBS carried it 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon.
I have a couple questions. One, how long did you carry that Catholic kilt that you didn't tell them?
Not very long. You know, I don't know how, and maybe I don't know if you're the same way, Mo, but, you know, so much of that, look, I got so much of who I am and all that stuff from my Catholic education. But ironically, my Catholic education also was what made me, in many ways, a liberal, right?
Yeah.
About all the social justice and those things that attracted me to, frankly, being also a Democrat. So I didn't see it as that. So much of the other stuff about the faith, I let go of early, right? In high school.
Me too, yeah.
I remember getting in an argument with my mother about, you know, coming home from Catholic high school, where the priest teaching our religion class said that if you were a Catholic and went to another religion, you were degrading yourself, but if the other way around, you were getting closer to God. And I didn't really understand that. My mother was, we're spending all this money on your Catholic education. What do you mean you question that? And I was like, I just don't understand. If someone finds more comfort in being a Methodist or a Baptist, why does that matter?
Oh, God. Yeah. I also want to, I don't want to jump ahead to too much and too quickly here, but I think it's an important moment to share something very personal and special, I think, to you and I know, because we've talked about it so many times. But speaking of your brother Dick's passing from AIDS, I can't help but recall that you did something so extraordinary when you were social secretary to the Gores, to actually take the Gores to the AIDS memorial quilt on the mall in Washington, D.C. Yeah. And I remember that, Philip, as if it was yesterday.
Well, and even to backtrack, Mo, during the campaign in '92 when they were running, Tipper actually went and read names at the quilt when the Bushes were still president. And she read my brother's name. I didn't know she was going to do that. And then in the inaugural parade of '93, they actually asked that a few dozen quilts be marched in the parade. And
your brother's was. I didn't know. Oh my God, I'm so glad I had you on. I'm learning things I didn't know.
I didn't know they were going to do that. Those were all surprises.
We are going to our second break. You obviously don't want to leave now. We're just getting started. Come back and stay with Philip, and I will see you in just a few seconds.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly?
I'm learning.
What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep.
These days, the haughty rich in our country have developed such an arrogant sense of self-entitlement that they've gone from being merely irritating to infuriating. Unsurprisingly, their plutocratic greed and rigging of the system has generated a political backlash, including a widely popular push to tax the massive stashes of wealth the upper class has amassed by stiffing the middle class and poor. Alarmed by this uprising, the rich have launched a major effort to diffuse public anger, not by altering their own behavior, but by a semantical twist. Interestingly, since the rich has become such a negative phrase, it is being dropped from the vocabularies of right-wing media, lawmakers, and other defenders of wealth concentration. Rather, they now glorify the millionaire-billionaire class as, quote, high earners and high net worth individuals. Both are awkward phrases, yet both serve to exalt the fortunate few as superior earners and worthy individuals. Words matter because they're powerful social constructs that shape our culture's moral values. For example, even failed CEOs who preside over big losses still collect boodles of cash from the corporate hierarchy, while working stiffs who perform their jobs admirably at the same corporation get pay cuts or even get booted. Boeing, for instance, suffered $12 billion in losses last year, costing 30,000 workers their jobs, yet the top exec was rewarded with $21 million in pay. The establishment media cloaked the greed of the chief by saying he had earned his millions and is now worth such and such money. This is Jim Hightower saying these aren't euphemisms, they're lies. To get the truth, the media might ask ousted workers how much they think the CEO actually earned and is worth.
Welcome back to In the Know with Mo. My guest this week is my dear and wonderful brother and friend, Philip Dufour, the president and creative director of the Dufour Collaborative, one of the world's most premier event management and experience design firms. We're having an incredible, heartfelt conversation. We are going to get to events, I promise. I promise you we are. We're going to get to events, and we're going to pick Philip's brain on how do you throw that perfect party? How do you put together an event during a pandemic, post-pandemic? You know, we're going to talk about that, I promise, in the last segment. But I'm taking full advantage of having this brilliant, incredible, soulful human being on to talk about some life issues too. And so on that note, Philip, I want to pick up where we left off, because I think, again, we have such parallel life experiences. I can't wait for us to write our book this coming year, because we're going to talk about all of this. So we don't want to divulge everything here today, right? Because we want people to buy our book and read our book. But I do want to go to this question that I have for you. 3 of the 5 Dufour kids, Alexander, Louisiana, between the East and the West, the North and the South, the Cajun, the non-Cajun, right? All of that, you know, and very Catholic. And you've described you lost a brother to AIDS. And I, in the break, asked you a question that I want to ask on air, because it matters to me. And I think it's important for us to talk about these things so people can hear these things and hopefully learn, evolve, and grow with us. I asked you in the break, how did your parents, with that traditional Catholicism in that particular era, right? How did they ever have claimed there was a nexus between your brother who was gay, who died of AIDS, his behavior as a gay man, and this disease that took his life?
Yeah, you know, it was a really traumatic and difficult time for our family, like it would be for anyone. And I had just come out to them not long before. And so there was a lot of that still happening, where they were, particularly my mother, was very angry about it and couldn't understand it. My dad, who was always compassionate about issues, and you can relate to this, kind of did whatever my mother did.
Yes.
Follow her lead. So they were really, they weren't supportive at all of my brother. They were shamed, you know, embarrassed about it. You know, my parents, like yours, were, you know, depression babies, right? My dad, like your dad, was a World War II Navy veteran, and my dad, when I told him I was gay, talked about how he knew some people like me in the Navy, right? Which I think also made him more understanding and expanding. I'm sure my mother must have known people, so it was hard, and they didn't talk to my brother for a long time. He cut them out of his life during many phases of his illness because he needed to reserve his energy for positive healing. He became a Buddhist, which also really, really was a dagger to their heart.
To them, yeah.
But it was his Buddhist community who visited him daily when he was sick, who chanted with him, who actually, talking about the quilt earlier, when we went to, my sister and I, who made my brother's quilt when we went to look at it, there were 5 panels for him from friends. We had no idea they were there. And one of them was from his Buddhist community in Dallas. And when he died, it was obviously terrible and traumatic. And my mother was still not over it, and she couldn't understand, I think. And so, what I learned later in life, about 3 years later, I finally had to forgive them because I understood at a moment that my being angry with them, and particularly her, was only hurting me.
That's exactly
it wasn't
right.
hurting her at all. And so what I finally did through a program, actually, I did a life spring course. And a lot of that was but what I learned most importantly from that course was I put myself in their shoes and try to put myself in and see the situation through their eyes. And what I understood at that moment was that my mother was only doing what she knew how to do.
That's exactly it.
Right?
Yeah.
She came from her mother was 43 when my mother was born in 1921. So you can imagine that took my grandmother, who I never knew, back to a Victorian era. And she was the youngest of 4 girls, my mother, and the closest sister in age to her was 9 years older.
Yeah. So many lessons here, Philip, right? So many lessons. I mean, we're all just a product of our life experiences, as you and I discussed so many times. But I want to reiterate a couple of things you just so beautifully, powerfully stated. One, the power of healing and the necessity to heal, because every one of us has trauma.
Correct.
Right? And if
including my mother.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're only a byproduct of your life experiences. Yeah. And my mother, also on the other side, was a member of Mensa. She scored in the 99th percentile. She graduated from high school when she was 15. I think if she had been born 10 years later, she might not have opted to get married and have kids. She and my dad didn't know each other that long. I think my mother could have been a lawyer. She said to me once, if opportunities to go to the military academies existed when I was growing up, I would have loved to have been able to do that.
Oh, interesting.
But she was also a product of this very Catholic faith.
Yeah.
Her mother died 2 months to the day after my mother married, and my mother was the last of the 4 girls to get married.
Gotcha.
Right? So
again, and see, you put yourself in her shoes. I thought that was a very beautiful thing to share with our audience, because I think sometimes we forget that her behavior at that moment when Dick passed away, right? The shame, the anger, the hurt, right? Again, that's where she was at on her journey.
Yep.
And that was a manifestation of her life experiences to that point.
And not ironically, but my best friend who I mentioned to you, who died of AIDS about 8 years later, who was so helpful to my family, my brother, because he lived in Dallas. And he picked me up at the airport when I went to see my brother for the last time. And he said, I just want you to be prepared and ready to see him. He was about 95 pounds at that point, really sick. But it was his mother who was this amazing Italian. Well, she was French, but she was married to an Italian. She had, actually, ironically, she and my dad knew each other from high school. But she was like a second mom to me. She sat my mother down when Dick was sick at some point and said, it doesn't matter what he is sick from. He is your son.
That's right.
To love him and care for him.
Yeah. Well, good for her. What an angel she is. So look, I think the other thing I want to say before we move on to another subject is that one of the things I just learned from hearing your story is also, in addition to the power of healing and the necessity to heal, forgive, again, the only person being hurt, as you so perfectly said, is us, right? When we harbor that. but it's also to parents who might be watching our podcast or listening to our radio show. To parents, just please, I hope Philip's beautiful, heartfelt, and personal story reminds you as a parent that every word you utter to your children can impact their life forever. And so please, to the parents out there, remember, choose your words and your actions wisely. Both Philip and I have talked about this for literally 20 years since we've known each other, about the love we have for our parents. I had the privilege of meeting his father, Duffy, and he was, as Philip was alluding to a minute ago, so similar to my own dad that Philip and I have gotten to commiserate and collaborate and learn, I think, a lot from each other about how to deal with our dads and their idiosyncrasies and their nuances, because they were so cut out of the same cloth. But I think the other thing that Philip and I have learned, I hope, from one another is that we learned to recognize that the love we had for our parents was never going to be diminished by their actions toward us, that we realized that, as Philip said a minute ago, they were doing the best they could.
And I credit my success and where I am today to where I come from, right? And I think my dad grew up really, really, really poor. He was the oldest of 6 kids. My mother grew up very comfortable, didn't probably suffer so much during the Depression, but she was still frugal. But they celebrated all of us and anything we wanted to do. And I have to give them credit for that. All 5 of us chose completely different career paths. My brother David is in the oil business. My brother Dick was in theater. They weren't happy about that when he left pre-med school, but they were very proud of him when he went on to be in Hello, Dolly with Carol Channing and other things. My sister Mary.
I didn't know that either.
My sister Mary, is a teacher at Sidwell, and she got her master's and she played tennis. My brother Paul, who died 2 years ago, went to school and was always a hard worker, and he worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 30 plus years and became really renowned within the service. And so they celebrated all of us. We all played different sports. Dick, Mary, ironically, the 3 gay kids all have an artistic bent. Dick was a singer and a good painter. Mary is a great artist. She majored in printmaking in school. I have a degree in graphic design. So it's just funny, but they celebrated all of that in each of us. And they encouraged us to read. They encouraged us to think big.
Well, and what a great way to go into break on a positive note about Mr. and Mrs. Dufour. May they both be resting in peace, a well-earned peace. Both of them in heaven. Hopefully Duffy's with my daddy. And they're having some coffee together and swapping war stories.
I'm sure
we'll be right back, and we are going to talk about events, I promise, in this entire next segment with Philip Dufour, the CEO of the Dufour Collaborative.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. We show up differently, worship differently, and have found new ways to express our love and support to family and friends. But now there are vaccines, and they are the first step that lets us get back into the things we miss most. Like spreading the word without spreading concern, girls tripping instead of solo sipping, brunching instead of late night munching, and talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. It's okay to have questions about COVID-19 vaccines.
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Is it safe?
Can I trust it?
What about pre-existing conditions?
Now get the facts. Visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when COVID-19
Welcome to Code of Whack, your podcast,
on America's broken healthcare system and how Medicare for All could help. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. What challenges do doctors and their patients face when it comes to giving and receiving quality healthcare in America? To find out, we spoke to Dr. Nancy Naparco, a pediatric neurologist who works for Children's Hospital Los Angeles. Welcome to Code WAC, Dr. Naparco. So what is it like as a physician dealing with different health insurance companies?
Just like they will refuse payment to a doctor for seeing a patient, they refuse to the doctor the ability to order the best medicine or treatment without a lot more work and validating it, and still you can't get it. In fact, I do a clinic on Saturday. I see about 15 patients, and I will say almost every single one of them, I spent a good part of the medical visit talking about what was rejected and trying to think up other things that might help their child. I can pick out the best treatment and even be conservative about it. Not the strongest medicine, but something that should work, or different tests, and they get rejected. Insurance just won't cover it. I totally resent medical insurance companies. I'm in the position that I think medical insurance companies have no right to exist.
Thank you, Dr. Nancy Naparco. Find more Code WAC episodes on ProgressiveVoices.com and on the PV app. You can also subscribe to Code WAC wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, uplifting the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. I'm Brenda Gazar.
Welcome back to In the Know with Mo. My guest this week, and I'm so sad every week, as y'all know, when we get to the last segment, because I just want to keep going and going. My very dear friend, Philip Dufour, president and creative director of the Dufour Collaborative. So I promised we have to talk about events but I'm so glad we had those 3 segments together, Philip. So Philip, you are, as the former social secretary to the course, we have to have you back, by the way, because we got so carried away on all those incredibly important topics that we didn't even talk about your days as a social secretary, your days, Yeah. We're going to have you back to do a whole thing on that. But let's talk about events today, because my God, obviously you're one of the world's most talented event managers and creative design and experience design gurus, really, of the globe. And so first, what is this pandemic? How has it impacted that entire industry? And then the second question, which I think is really important to our listeners and viewers, is we're all going to want to host parties again. We're all going to want to have events again, small ones and large ones. What's that going to be like now? What's changed, and what do you see is going to happen?
Well, the last year, I'm grateful. I have a really great team who works with me, who are much smarter about technology and all of these great platforms that you and I are sharing on today. And so we pivoted. We were really lucky. We had a really good year. But we pivoted quickly. Like our first big event, we had to pivot in 2 weeks, last March.
From in-person to virtual, in other words.
Correct. It was a 3-day conference for a very high-level group of people, small group, but really powerful, progressive content. So it taught us a lot of things about it. One, what we finally were able to help people understand, and what we understood, was what we've been doing for the last year is basically producing TV shows, right? Because everyone's watching it like you are now. Secondly, it helped particularly nonprofits, because I do a lot of work with a lot of nonprofits, help them really get their brand out, get their message out, and raise money usually. And so it helped them understand that their content had to be much more precise and concise than it ever is. When you're in a ballroom with 1,000 people, you can keep changing your remarks. You can, I can throw an extra speaker on, but you can't do that when you're taping stuff. So it was good, actually. So it was good for them, and it helped them hone their message. And it allowed us to broaden audiences, right? So when we did an event, we do a series called Great Americans for the Smithsonian's Museum of American History. And our last Great American, and the only virtual one, was Dr. Fauci. And we were able to expand what is normally an in-person event for about 250 people We had an audience of over 1,000 people who responded and probably over 800 who joined. So we have to figure out moving forward, how do you engage those people still?
Yeah.
But how do you then, make the event in person as powerful? And so that's what we're working on now. There'll be, I think, a brief period where we're doing what people are calling hybrid.
Yeah.
But I think a year from now, people are going to be really over joining events via screen.
So from all of these, first of all, I've never asked you this. How many events would you say you have now put on in your career?
Oh God. Well, my firm in 2018, we did 85 events.
Okay.
So extrapolate that out. I mean, some years we've done more. So we average pretty close to 100 events a year. So I don't know, gosh, that's a lot. I have to go back and think about that.
Yeah.
And my current business for 12 years. So
over 1,000 events easily, probably.
Easily, yes, easily.
God, that's mind-boggling.
It's kind of nuts. It's kind of crazy.
So now, so I wanted to set that stage before I asked you this question because I've never asked you that. And so over 1,000 events, you have had your brain, creative soul, your touch, and your style. And you do have your own style. There's no doubt about it, starting with those damn glasses that are so hot and beautiful. And so, Philip, when all of those 1,000 events, what would you say are the top 3 most important components to having a successful event?
Well, a few things, but one, I always say that the most important 20 minutes of any event are the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes. So if you have a guest that arrives and your check-in process is messed up, you don't know what you're doing or you've messed that up, then you've already put someone in a spot where they're not happy, right? So what I do at most of our events is I'm at the front door because I want to monitor that, but I also know a lot of people. So if I would see you, Mo, I would say, Mo, come right on in. Let's get you right through the door. Then the second 10 minutes or the second most important 10 minutes are the last 10. So as the event has ended and guests are departing, is coat check messed up? These are simple things, right? Is valet line long? And then what you've hoped is that you've had this beautiful event for the 2 or 3 hours in between. But if you've screwed up the departure for these guests, all that gets erased.
Interesting.
Right? So
first impression, last impression then.
You never have a second opportunity to make a first impression, right?
Yeah.
The second thing would be, I always say to people, if you have no budget to spend on an event, spend it on lighting. Because lighting,
really?
You talk about this style and an ambiance.
Yeah.
And lighting does so much. Same with people's homes. So ambiance is so important. And then lastly, I would say, what is the thread you have woven throughout your event? Where is it that people are when they leave your event? What is their headspace? What do they witness? And we always start with clients at that space and arc our way backwards, right? And weave that thread all the way through. And in that thread, there need to be elements of surprise, always. You never give everything away. I know this is not 3 things, but you don't ever give anything.
You can do 5. I wasn't limiting you.
You never give things away all at the same moment. How do you keep people engaged? And a lot of that has to do with elements of surprise. And in the beginning, you talked about experienced design firms and why we made that change. And I will tell you, when I first started in this industry, it's not that it wasn't respected, but people didn't understand it. And so, it's why we don't call ourselves party planners, right? Or even event planners, because what you are doing is you are creating experiences for people.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant.
And everyone has an event that means something to them, whether it's personal, professional. It could be a nonprofit event where you were so moved by a topic you knew nothing about and you were blown away, and it sets you on a trajectory to get involved in, Alzheimer's or get involved in gay and lesbian youth or mentoring.
Yeah.
So
could be a call to action. The event could be a call to action. Yeah.
And so that's why we really call ourselves, because the guest experience from our perspective is the most important thing that we do. An event is never just an event. People don't just do an event to do an event. There's a purpose. And you always have to keep that in mind. And what is that purpose? And, nonprofits struggle with it a lot because, they end an event and then they already want to start talking about next year's event.
Yeah.
And sometimes I tell people, pause, let's pause. Maybe you want to skip it a year.
Yeah. So keep that kind, almost a mystery,
Correct.
like a suspense, right? Like, so in the event itself too, I love that you just taught us all that, because that all makes sense, but then you realize that we don't think about it, right? Like that's why I wanted to have you on, because I think we all just take events for granted, whether they're virtual or in person. Correct. Or this hybrid of the future.
At the end of the day, we're storytellers.
See.
We help people tell their stories.
Yeah.
Right. And, the events, to your point, when people walk into an event, it's been one of our struggles during COVID, where we've tried to help lawmakers understand what we are as an industry, because so much of what we do is behind the scenes, right?
Exactly.
Right. So people have no clue that when you come to an event for 900 people, for instance, it has probably taken 700 people or close to 1,000 people to put that event on over a year's time.
That's so important to remind me. Exactly. That's why I wanted to have you on, because to me, it's about like, for all of us, the non-geniuses that you are and your team are, right? We just show up, whether it's virtually or in person. And then we're like, ooh, look at the flowers. Ooh, the lamb chop tasted good. Ooh, the music was good, right? But we don't realize that you just pointed out and reminded us hours and hours, if not months, of preparation and work.
Absolutely. And, if we do our jobs, you don't notice anything but all the fine details. That's the other thing I would say to you, that and it's the thing my dad taught me, actually. It's the same things as understanding that you write a personal note to somebody when they've done something nice for you. It's having the moment and the time throughout the process to focus on the tiny details, because the tiny details make the most difference. And whether they're noticed or not, they're noticed, if that makes sense. Sometimes they're so noticed that people will say something. Other times they just understand that this event was flawless.
It could be subliminal, and almost subconscious, right? Well, so I am so sad that this is over, because I could just keep going on and on and on with you. But I want to say a couple of things as we close our time together. First and the most important thing, I love you. I just love you. And you are very special to me. You always have been. And we've been through so many life experiences together in the last 22 years, and I'm looking forward to the next 22 more years.
Absolutely.
So that's first and foremost. The second thing, I'm so proud of you. And I just want to tell the audience, you keep watching, because you're going to see Philip everywhere. He just was like in Home and Garden magazine in London. He's in the Washington Post. He's in Washington Magazine. I mean, he is everywhere. CNN, you're going to see him everywhere. He is one of our globe's most premier experts. And so now you can say you got to spend time with him here at In the Know with Mo. And then lastly, I am, from the bottom of my heart, I hope all of you go to unicornhunters.com, watch my first production that I've ever gotten to do in my life. I was listening intently, as you could tell, to Philip, because I just started realizing the parallel from my first production experience here in Hollywood. Please go watch Unicorn Hunters, unicornhunters.com. I promise you're going to experience something that's going to motivate you and call you to action and actually improve your life. So thank you all for being with us at In the Know with Mo. I love you all. I thank you. Thank you, my incredible Philip. I love you so much. Mark, thank you.